Hi there, my name is Jessica. Have you ever found yourself stuck between your mother and her lover? A position that you have absolutely no say in? Well, that was exactly the situation I found myself in, and I watched while everything unfolded, waiting for my life to be ruined beyond repair by my own mother. When my mom got married to my dad, she was only 18. He met her in a coffee shop that she used to work at. He was the owner of a big company back then, and he was 33 years older than she was when he decided to marry her. She agreed to marry him at that time, but it wasn't because she was in love with him. She agreed because she loved his money. He was her golden ticket to a lavish lifestyle. After they got married, they had me and my twin brother James. Dad loved us so much, but his love wasn't enough to make him stay. He died last summer and left us a lot of money and a lot of property. However, we were still just minors, so Mom was our legal guardian, and that's where all the trouble began. It wasn't easy for me and James to get over our dad's death, unlike our mom, who seemed to go back to normal a month after it happened. She started going out with some guy named Mike, who was excessively concerned about the way he looked. There's no doubt that my mom is a very attractive woman herself, but I knew for sure that Mike wasn't attracted to her, but rather to something else. At first, their dates were normal. I mean, they went to luxurious restaurants and fancy bars, but little by little, I began to notice that there was something that didn't seem right. One day, she invited him to have dinner with us so that he could meet me and James. It was the first time for him to visit our house. From the moment he set foot in our house, his eyes wandered around, taking every single thing in, and he seemed in awe at everything he saw. While we were having dinner, he looked at me and James and said, "You must be some very lucky kids to live in such a lavish house and to have all this money." He pretty much only spoke about money, and there wasn't even a spark between him and my mom. I mean, he barely even looked at her in the eyes. After that date, Mom started to look frustrated every time she spoke to Mike on the phone. I used to hear him scream at her on the phone, even when I was all the way up in my room. And after every argument they had, he always threatened to leave her. Mom was very committed to him and didn't want to lose him. After my dad's death, she thought that there weren't many men who would want to be with her. So she wanted Mike to stay with her no matter the cost. And that was exactly what happened. Mike stayed, but it definitely cost us a lot. Mom began to buy him some really expensive gifts. She gave him everything that he wanted to make sure he stayed with her. They weren't normal gifts. They were insanely expensive gifts. She bought him a Bentley Bentayga and a luxury house next to ours. She bought him Rolexes and clothes by Versace, Prada, and Gucci. And it didn't stop there. She even sent him alone on a trip to the Hawaiian Islands when he told her that he needed some time away to rest and recuperate. I didn't know if Mom was aware of the fact that he was clearly just using her. Not only was he using her, but he was also spending our dad's money, which was meant to be for me and James. It's true that my father was rich, but he wasn't Mark Zuckerberg rich. And the way things were headed, it seemed there would come a day when all our money would be in the hands of Mike. And when that time came, he would break up with our mom, and there wouldn't be anything left for me and James. I had to do something. I wasn't going to let Mom act like that forever. But before I got the chance to take any action, it appeared that God had saved us all. On that vacation that Mike wanted to spend alone in Hawaii, Mom decided to surprise him. So she traveled to Hawaii 2 days later, and you won't believe what she discovered. Well, you might be able to guess. She found out that Mike wasn't taking some time to rest as he said he would be. It turned out that he'd traveled to Hawaii to enjoy a nice vacation with his girlfriend on our money. She caught him cheating, and she came back to us brokenhearted. It was pretty stupid of my mom to fall for someone like Mike, but at least now I can say that she learned a valuable lesson. We definitely lost a fair amount of our dad's fortune that he'd left us, but there was still enough left for me and James to live a good life and to be able to secure our future, and Mom's too. What did you think of my story? Please share your comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel.
Hello, I am Patty, and a few months ago, I discovered the horrifying truth about my biological parents that my adoptive parents had kept hidden from me for all these years. That was the biggest shock of my life. Ever since I was a little girl, I had been aware that the couple who raised me, the Browns, were friends of my family. They adopted me after my parents passed away when I was just a baby. I was told they had an accident and it cost them their lives, but I was never told what kind of accident it was. So I just grew up with the Brown family, who already had 3 children of their own, and I was happy. One day, my friends decided to go on a trip to the beach. I was super excited about it because Mr. and Mrs. Brown hated going to the beach. So at the age of 13, that would be my first proper beach experience. I was sure Mr. and Mrs. Brown wouldn't mind it, but I was very wrong. I begged them, yet they wouldn't budge. I couldn't understand why they were this adamant, so I continued nudging. I mean, this is what all teenagers do, no? But what happened then changed my life forever. While I was yelling at Mrs. Brown and asking for an explanation, she said out loud, "We are afraid that you will face your parents' fate." Then she immediately realized what she said and her face turned red. I was so confused and asked for the whole story while I was crying. That's when Mr. Brown asked me to calm down and started telling me the whole story. He said that my parents went on fishing trips regularly, and on the day of the accident, they'd seen on the news that a storm might hit the area, so they decided to cancel the trip. However, their friends who were supposed to go with them convinced them that there was no need to worry that much because they'd stay close to land. My parents agreed and left me at our friend's family house with their older children, and the 2 couples went on their trip. However, the trip didn't go to plan. It wasn't a pleasant adventure at all. They lost control of the fishing ship, and it was dragged way out into the ocean by the strong current. Each couple got on one of the rescue boats that were attached to the boat, but unfortunately, one of them was broken, and it was foggy and stormy, so when they started asking for help, their friends on the other boat couldn't reach them or help them in any way. And just like that, the bodies of my parents were found there the next day, and the cause of their death was stated as drowning. As Mr. Brown told me what had happened, I started to cry. I thought about how my parents must have been feeling while they were stuck out there, waiting for help. Help that never came. And then I couldn't stop crying. They must have been so terrified. I then yelled at Mr. Brown and asked, "Who was with my parents on that boat? Who were these people?" Mr. Brown looked at me and then answered in a broken voice, "It was us." I froze. I couldn't grasp any of that. I ran to my room and didn't leave it for days. I didn't want to see or hear anyone. All I wanted was to be by myself and think of my poor parents. Almost half a year has passed since I discovered the truth. Mr. and Mrs. Brown told me over and over again that they tried to save my parents, but couldn't, and that it was their guilt that had kept them from telling me the truth. Over time, my relationship with Mr. and Mrs. Brown has gotten better, but I am still unable to forgive them fully. What do you think of my story? Please share your opinions, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel.
I am Monica. A few days ago, I discovered something shocking in my friend's room. Okay, so I had a friend named John in my piano class who I thought was gay. I enjoyed hanging out with him. One time, Mom came to pick me up from my piano class. John started asking weird questions about her, like, "How old is your mother? Does your father live with you? What does she do for a living?" I answered him, but I was truly confused. Once, John suggested visiting me at home. I thought it might be a good idea. I mean, he was just a friend, right? So I invited him to dinner. There was something in the air that didn't feel right. John and Mom were so engaged in their conversation that it felt like I was nothing but another piece of furniture in the room or something. When the evening was finally over, I thanked God for that. But the story was far from over. John started to regularly visit me at home with and without occasion, and he would engage in exceptionally long conversations with Mom every single time. It was really frustrating. From Mom's side, she thought that John was a little weird, but also that he was a polite kid. The next time he wanted to visit me, I suggested visiting his house instead. He looked uneasy at my suggestion, but he agreed. In his room, I noticed something odd. The walls were covered in posters of old ladies in short skirts. John went outside for a minute to bring us something to eat, and my curiosity pressed me to look into his closet to explore what might be in a gay guy's room. But what I found was nothing short of astonishing. His closet was full of women's panties, and not any panties. They were my mother's. I had absolutely no doubt about it. They were hers. When he returned to the room, I told him I had an urgent matter back home. I apologized and left his place with 1,000 questions in my mind. It couldn't be that my mother left those panties at his place. Mom was madly in love with my dad, and she would never cheat on him, especially not with a boy who was almost the same age as her own daughter. And like I said, she thought he was weird. I rushed back home and went straight to my mother, asking her if she'd noticed anything missing lately. And guess what? She told me that she didn't know where her panties were vanishing to. What was going on? Did this mean John liked my mom? It made perfect sense. If John wasn't gay nor attracted to girls my age, it was more than likely that he was into older women, like my mother. That also explained the posters on the walls of his room. How dare he think about my mom in that way? She was my mother, and she was a married woman. He'd used me to get to her. I couldn't control myself, so I went to his house. When he opened the door, his whole family was there, gathered at the table. I didn't care. The only thing I cared about at the time was yelling in his face for what he'd done. I pointed my finger at him and shouted about everything I knew. I concluded with, "I know that you are obsessed with my mother and that you took every chance to get into my house to be close to her." Before I knew it, John was lying on the ground motionless. I'd barely finished my last sentence, and his mom started screaming at the top of her lungs. His dad called an ambulance, which carried him to the hospital. I later learned that John had a breathing condition, and that when I faced him with the truth that he'd carefully hidden from everybody, especially his parents, he couldn't stand it and passed out. I don't know what to feel. I wish him a speedy recovery, but I don't regret what I did. Tell me what you think in the comments.